So the main challenges that countries face is, of course, having adequate legislation in place, and more importantly, the legislation with standards that guides the disclosure of wrongdoing in public offices. I can speak specifically for my country, Belize. While we've been having the conversation surrounding ensuring that there is whistleblowers legislation in place, there is little or no standard to guide us by, and as a result, what we have before us presently is a draft legislation that, as we would refer to it, has absolutely no teeth. In addition to this, the lack of a global standard also discourages or restricts public officers from stepping forward because of fear of retaliation. Primarily, in my case, from government. I think that it is known that in the Caribbean, we exist in a highly politicized environment. In the other regions, it could be worse. In the private sector also, I think that while we're focusing on public sector, I think it's important that we understand that the private sector cannot exist without the public sector, and neither can the public sector exist without the private sector. And so any effort to establish standards to address the issue of whistleblowers should try to encompass how both of these environments coexist. And more importantly, how I think for me, what I want to see in any standard that is established is more a standard that encourages education and that encourages whistleblowing rather than setting standards that address or that encompasses punitive measures against organizations that are found culpable of wrongdoing. What we've learned throughout these day and a half, or through this day and a half that we've been here, is that several countries have made an attempt to address the issue of whistleblowers. Of course, less than the majority. There are some good practices or best practices that can be adopted from the more developed countries. However, what we're seeing is that the vast majority of countries do not have an effective legislation in place to encourage whistleblowing and to protect whistleblowers from any retaliation from their employers. Again, drawing from my home country, Belize, there has been some efforts in the establishment of an integrity commission, to, as I stated earlier, the drafting of a Whistleblowers Act. But neither the FORA, which is the Finance and Audit Reform Act, or the Prevention in Public Service Act, or the draft Whistleblowers Act adequately address the issue of corruption, and none of them encourages public officers from stepping forward or from existing without any fear to report or to highlight the issue of corruption. And I think the biggest gap in all of them is that there is absolutely no punitive measures in place so that people who are found guilty of willfully abusing of public assets or public finances are held accountable. I can say that in Belize, the former Prime Minister was found guilty of spending in excess of $1.3 billion without the approval of Parliament. But neither the Finance and Audit Reform Act or any of the other legislation had anything in there to hold him accountable. So while the court declared that $1.3 billion was spent without approval, there was absolutely no consequence for that. If we all had a wish list, it would have been, of course, that we would leave from here with all parties agreeing, both government, workers representative, and employers representative agreeing that the ILO should adopt standards. Unfortunately, this conversation so far shows that while we all agree that much more needs to be done to establish standards or to encourage whistleblowing, there isn't a consensus that the ILO is the place or that the ILO ought to adopt those standards. From the workers' side of things, we believe this is the place, and we believe that the ILO should adopt those standards, but the other tripartite partners do not, at least at this moment, seem to want to share that view. So coming out of here, it is my hope that if we don't get a convention, that at least we would get a recommendation to ILO members that would set the standards required for the implementation, for the drafting and implementation of whistleblowers legislation across the world. I would like to thank, of course, the ILO and more importantly, the sector of the ILO responsible for this technical meeting. I think it has proven very fruitful and beneficial to small countries like Belize, and I'm very grateful to, of course, PSI, the Caribbean Sub-Regional Office, for the opportunity to be here. It has been a learning experience for me, and I hope that as we move forward, that the knowledge and experience gained here can be utilized to not only improve the situation within the Caribbean, but more importantly, to improve the situation back home in my country, Belize.